Hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation. Today we're diving into the world of Oscar Wilde's famous play, The Importance of Being Earnest. This is the first slide, which simply introduces our topic with its original performance date, February 14th, 1895, at St. James's Theatre in London. We'll explore an act-by-act summary, analyze the themes and imagery, and discuss what makes this comedy so timeless and important. So, let's get started and enjoy this journey into Wilde's witty and clever work. Let's start with a famous quote from Algernon Moncrief in Act I. "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." This sets the tone for the play, highlighting how Wilde explores complex social truths through comedy. The play is structured into 3 acts, although originally Wilde planned for 4, which helps keep the story tight and engaging. One notable feature is the unity of place, which Wilde largely observes, meaning most of the action happens in a few key locations, giving the play a cohesive feel. Throughout the play, Wilde peppers it with brilliant epigrams, sharp, witty sayings that add to its charm and depth. In terms of genre, it's primarily a comedy of manners, highlighting societal norms and behaviors, mixed with elements of farce and satire, which exaggerate and critique those norms. Wilde himself called it a trivial comedy for serious people, emphasizing that underneath the humor, there's a meaningful critique of Victorian society. The play premiered on February 14, 1895, at the St. James's Theatre in London, and it was an instant hit both critically and with audiences. Oscar Wilde, the author, was an Irish playwright, known for his wit and aesthetic sensibility. He wrote this play in just 3 weeks in 1894, which is pretty remarkable considering its sharpness and depth. Overall, this play is a brilliant example of Wilde's talent for combining entertainment with insightful social commentary, making it a timeless piece that continues to resonate today. On this slide, we see how Wilde masterfully uses his butlers to deliver deadpan observations that rival the wit of their masters. For example, Lane's remarks on marriage are particularly sharp, adding a layer of humor through their dry, humorous tone. This creates what Wilde calls a comic democracy of wit, where everyone's cleverness shines, regardless of social status. Moving on to the characters, we have Lane and Merriman, the servants, who often serve as wry commentators on the upper class. Then there's the local vicar, Canon Chasuble, who is eager to rechristen adults as Earnest, a gentle parody of clerical pomposity and the seriousness of religious figures. His earnest courtship of Miss Prism also humorously highlights the absurdity of clerical self-importance. Miss Prism, Cecily's governess, is another key character. Her absent-minded act, such as leaving a baby in a handbag, becomes the mysterious plot device that drives much of the story's intrigue and comedy. Her forgetfulness is not just comic, but also foundational to the plot's twists. Lady Bracknell, on the other hand, is the play's formidable social arbiter. Her sharp interrogation of Jack is one of the most famous scenes, exemplifying Victorian snobbery at its most absurd and magnificent. She embodies the rigid social hierarchy and the absurdity of Victorian values. Cecily Cardew, Lady Bracknell's daughter, is a quintessential Wildean heroine, witty, confident, and passionately fond of the name Earnest. She's determined and self-assured, perfectly embodying Wilde's ideal of a clever, independent heroine. Gwendolen Fairfax, Jack's witty friend, is known for her sharp epigrams. She invents Bunbury, an invalid friend, as an excuse to escape social obligations, highlighting her cleverness and the play's love of wordplay and wit. Finally, Algernon Moncrief, the dashing bachelor, creates a false brother, Earnest, to lead a dissolute life in London. His true identity remains the central mystery of the play. His role as a witty foil to Jack underscores Wilde's theme that appearances and identities are often superficial and playful. Overall, these characters and their witty exchanges exemplify Wilde's comic exploration of social roles, identity, and the absurdities of Victorian society, tying into our broader theme of humor and critique in the play. Ladies and gentlemen, as Lady Bracknell makes her dramatic entrance, she begins to scrutinize Cecily's fortune, raising questions about her background and social standing. Recognizing Miss Prism, she uncovers the mystery surrounding the handbag, which becomes a pivotal clue in the story. Through this, the secret of Jack's true identity is finally revealed. He is Algernon's elder brother, and his real name is indeed Earnest. With these revelations, all the misunderstandings are cleared up, and the engagements are restored, leaving everyone happily and quite earnestly committed to their new futures. This resolution ties together the play's themes of identity, social status, and the humorous pursuit of sincerity. Let's take a closer look at Slide 5, which focuses on the symbolic significance of the handbag. As we see, the handbag represents both identity and mystery. It's a key symbol in the play because it's linked to Jack's origins. He was found as a baby inside a handbag at Victoria Station. This detail is pivotal because it raises questions about identity and social norms. Both Algernon and Jack have fictitious alter egos, and the handbag serves as a symbol of that concealment. It's not just a practical object, but a sort of emblem of the characters' secret lives and the play's themes of deception and surface appearances. The central joke here is that Jack's whole persona is built around this mysterious past, which is hinted at through the handbag. It adds a layer of wit and farce, something sparkling and clever, that keeps the audience engaged and amused. The tone and setting, Algernon's flat on Half Moon Street, are casual and intimate, which helps us see how these deceptions are woven into everyday life. It's a humorous reflection on how appearances can be deceiving and how identity can be constructed or manipulated. So, in essence, the handbag isn't just an object. It's a symbol of the play's core themes, identity, mystery, and the social masks we wear. It's a clever device that drives much of the humor and irony in the story. Let's start with Gwendolyn's love for the name Earnest. What's fascinating here is that she cares about the name itself, not even the man behind it. This is actually one of the most radical jokes in Act I. It really exposes how Victorian courtship was often based more on social signs and appearances than on genuine understanding or connection. Wilde is showing us how language can replace reality, how the mere name Earnest stands in for the person, making language more real than the actual individual. Moving on to Lady Bracknell, she is Wilde's most devastatingly comic creation. Her questionnaire reduces marriage to a kind of social transaction, emphasizing class and status over personal compatibility. For example, her horror at the mention of a handbag, which she sees as a symbol of triviality, exposes just how absurd Victorian class systems were, built on arbitrary markers of social standing. Lady Bracknell is both terrifying and ridiculous at the same time, making her the perfect target for Wilde's satire of Victorian authority. Now, let's talk about Algernon's Bunbury system. This is really the central philosophical idea of the play. Algernon invents a fictional friend, Bunbury, as a way to escape the constraints of society and its expectations. Wilde suggests that the fictions we create, these performances, can sometimes be more truthful and expressive than the roles society forces us into. It's a clever way of showing that performance can be a form of freedom. Finally, Wilde opens Act I with a series of paradoxical epigrams, short, witty sayings like, "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." These aren't just clever lines to get a laugh, they serve a deeper purpose. They invert Victorian moral certainties, making us laugh at the very values we hold dear. Wilde uses wit as a satirical weapon, challenging the audience to think critically about the moral assumptions of their society. So, in summary, these points all connect to one overarching theme. Wilde's play is a sharp critique of Victorian social norms, using language, satire, and performance to reveal the absurdity beneath the veneer of civility. Let's take a closer look at Slide 7. Here, we see the key event where Gwendolyn arrives, having followed Jack, and the two women, Cecily and Gwendolyn, meet. Interestingly, they discover they are both engaged to Ernest Worthing. This revelation is central to the play's comedy, as it highlights the web of deceptions and mistaken identities that drive the plot. This moment not only adds to the humorous chaos, but also emphasizes the theme of identity and the blurred lines between fiction and reality. It's a perfect example of how Wilde uses these misunderstandings to create farcical situations that accelerate toward chaos, as noted in the comic climax. Understanding this scene helps us see how Wilde cleverly manipulates social conventions and romantic entanglements to entertain and critique Victorian society. Act II is built on a fascinating idea of systematic doubling. We see two men named Earnest, two women engaged to him, two proposals, and two confessions. This structural mirroring isn't just meant to be funny. It actually suggests that human experience is more repetitive and interchangeable than Victorian individualism would have us believe. It's a way of showing how identities and roles can blur and mirror each other. Moving on, the confrontation between Cecily and Gwendolen is really Wilde's comic masterpiece of doubled irony. Social decorum, like offering cake or pouring tea, becomes a weapon. Every gesture of politeness is turned into an act of aggression. Wilde deliberately disconnects form and feeling, highlighting how social rituals can mask underlying tensions and even hostility. Now let's talk about the tea table scene. It shifts the setting to Hertfordshire, but Wilde makes it clear that this countryside isn't the idyllic, innocent place we might assume. Instead, it's where the fictions from London have been imported and taken root. Cecily, for example, is quite worldly in her way, and Miss Prism is just as romantically deluded as any London socialite. Wilde's idea of the pastoral is deeply ironic. It's not simple innocence, but a reflection of social illusions. And then there's Cecily's diary. Before she even meets Algernon, she's written a full romance with Earnest. When he arrives, reality must conform to her fiction. Wilde cleverly inverts cause and effect here. Imagination comes first, shaping her experience. The diary becomes a comic, radical assertion that art and imagination can actually influence and even override real life. So, in summary, Act II explores these themes of doubling, social masks, and the power of imagination, all woven into Wilde's witty, ironic critique of Victorian society and human nature. Now, on slide 9, we see a pivotal moment where Jack produces the handbag. Lady Bracknell then reveals a surprising truth. The baby was actually the son of her sister, which means Jack is Algernon's brother. This revelation underscores the intricate web of connections and misunderstandings that run through the play. It also highlights the recurring theme of identity and the importance of family ties. This moment is crucial because it shifts how we understand Jack's character and his social standing. It also sets the stage for the final revelations and resolutions that follow, tying back to the play's exploration of social status, identity, and the absurdity of societal expectations. The final revelation, that Jack literally is Earnest, is really the play's ultimate paradox. Wilde has spent 3 acts showing us that sincerity is a fiction, something we pretend to believe in. Yet, in the ending, he insists that the fiction was always sincere all along. It's neither a moral lesson nor just irony. It's a perfect, unresolvable comic joke that leaves us thinking. Now let's look at the playful wordplay, Earnest versus Earnest. Wilde suggests that language itself can redeem or reveal truths. For example, Miss Prism's mistake, placing the manuscript in the perambulator and the baby in the bag, serves as a clever Freudian joke about preferring fiction over reality. Wilde uses her error to satirize the Victorian governess figure, highlighting how art, like the novel and life, the baby, are dangerously interchangeable, blurring the lines between fiction and reality. Speaking of Miss Prism, her confession about the manuscript and the baby reveals a deeper layer. It shows how the novel and the baby are intertwined, almost inseparable. Wilde turns her mistake into a satirical comment on the Victorian obsession with morality and social order. Then there's Lady Bracknell, who initially blocks Jack's engagement over his origins. But it turns out she's partly responsible for those origins, her sister's child, her brother-in-law's household. She's the so-called arbiter of social purity, yet she's implicated in the very mystery she seeks to police. It's poetic justice in farce form. Her own prejudices and actions come back to haunt her. And finally, Jack's real name turns out to be Earnest all along. This is the play's big twist, that the fiction, Jack's assumed identity, was actually the truth. Wilde's resolution is both satisfying and deeply subversive. It seems to restore order, but really, it upends our notions of truth and deception. The lie was always the truth, and the truth was always a lie. Wilde shows us that the play refuses to be morally tidy. It's a radical joke about the fluidity of identity and morality. So in this slide, we see that Jack literally is earnest, but what does that really mean? Well, it's not about validating sincerity, but rather exposing the lie that was always accidentally true. The play ends in a paradox, not with a moral resolution, which is quite clever. Now, the irony here is that Jack and Algernon's fictional doubles actually allow them to be more genuinely themselves. The lies they tell become a kind of liberation for truth. Wilde suggests that social conventions often suppress our authentic desires far more than any fiction ever could. Moving on, Wilde also satirizes Victorian ideals with bunburying. The characters who are the most earnest, like Prism, Chasuble, Lady Bracknell, are actually the most comic. It shows that Victorian sincerity in its pompous form is often quite absurd. Then there's the idea of the women loving the name before the man. It's supposed to symbolize sincerity, but it's really just a sign of superficiality, holding onto a name as if it's meaningful when it's actually empty of real feeling. Finally, the play's title, The Importance of Being Earnest, is itself a joke. Earnest refers both to the name Earnest and to the quality of sincerity, but Wilde demonstrates that these two things are entirely unrelated. It's a clever reminder that appearances and reality often don't match. And as Algernon says, one must be serious about something if one is to have any amusement in life. Wilde really turns that idea on its head, showing us that seriousness and triviality are often intertwined in surprising ways. Let's start with Jack. At the beginning of the play, he literally doesn't know who he is. His origin is a complete mystery. It's only in Act III that we get a reveal. He gains an identity, a name, and a past. But what's really interesting is that the identity he's given by society is actually the one he himself invented. Wilde is making a clever joke here about Victorian identity politics, how much of who we are is constructed or imposed rather than truly authentic. Moving on to Cecily, she's created her own self. She's authored a persona that already has a romantic past. When Algernon arrives, she expects her written story to come to life. She wants reality to match her text. Her identity is radically self-authored, not something simply given to her by society, which makes her stand out as a character who is actively shaping her own self-image. Then there's Bunbury, who is never actually seen on stage, but is always present in the play's subtext. Bunbury symbolizes the freedom that social obligations deny us. His death, at the end, signifies the loss of this escape. His death represents the end of that secret, rebellious outlet, which is absorbed into the play's idea of legitimate happiness. Regarding Algernon and Bunbury, Algernon's Bunbury acts as a kind of alter ego, a way to indulge in pleasures and escape social responsibilities. This duality highlights the theme of deception and the double lives many characters lead. Now let's look at Jack, who has a split identity, playing the respectable guardian in the country and the dissolute Earnest in London. His character embodies Victorian double morality, duty versus desire. He's living a double life that reflects the societal expectations versus personal freedom. Finally, it's important to see that every major character in the play maintains a false identity or has one imposed upon them. Wilde uses this to explore the broader themes of deception, the double self, and the fluidity of identity itself. It's a playful yet sharp critique of how society constructs and enforces identities, often hiding the true selves beneath layers of performance. Wilde, an Irish writer educated at Oxford, wrote as an insider-outsider. His sharp satirical eye on English class rituals comes from close, intimate observation, combined with the perspective of someone who is always slightly on the outside. This dual position makes his critique even more effective, as the play becomes funnier and more pointed because it's written by someone who could never fully belong to that world. When we look at Wilde's portrayal of the Irish outsider's perspective, we see how he maps the geography of class. For Wilde, London is all about performance. Everything is a social act, whereas the countryside reveals more authentic and often comic desires. Living in the country is seen by some as a social necessity, a way to maintain a certain status, but for others, it signals obscurity or being outside the social center. Wilde cleverly contrasts town and country as signals of class. He highlights that ignorance, for example, is treated delicately, like a fragile exotic fruit, because touching it destroys the illusion. Lady Bracknell's view of education illustrates this well. She sees it as a social danger. Real knowledge or genuine feeling threatens to undermine the carefully constructed performance of class. Wilde's target here is the anti-intellectualism of the ruling class, which prefers superficial appearances over true understanding. In the play Lady Bracknell's Questionnaire, her probing into politics, income, country houses, and diet reduces marriage to a kind of corporate acquisition. Wilde's satire is precise. What society claims to see as a romantic union is really a property transaction, dressed up in evening wear. When Cecily's fortune of £130,000 comes into play, Lady Bracknell quickly rethinks her objections. The huge wealth effectively launders away any social irregularities or background issues. Wilde shows us that beneath this snobbery, class distinctions are ultimately about money. Birth matters less once money is involved. Money transforms the social landscape. The most savage joke in the play might be Lady Bracknell's horror at Jack's origins. She remarks that losing one parent might be a misfortune, but losing both looks like carelessness. Here, Wilde exposes how arbitrary and even ridiculous the foundation of class really is, treating a lost baby as a moral failing. Ultimately, class is revealed as a matter of pure accident, not moral worth. Wilde uses Lady Bracknell as a kind of stand-in for the entire class system, conducting a prolonged, brilliant satire of its absurd rituals, its arbitrary foundations, and its breathtaking hypocrisy. Through her, Wilde exposes the fragility and pretension that underpin Victorian society's ideas of class, snobbery, and social hierarchy. On this slide, we see that Miss Prism and Chasuble's courtship gently mocks the romantic self-deceptions of middle age. But what's interesting is that Wilde treats their relationship with surprising warmth. Their eventual union, which happens amid the chaos of the revelation, becomes the play's most genuinely sentimental moment. It shows how Wilde blends humor with real emotion. Moving on, Lady Bracknell wields a kind of power that traditionally belonged to the male head of a household. She's the one who interrogates, approves, refuses, and commands. Interestingly, her husband is entirely absent and seems almost irrelevant. This creates a family dynamic that's quite matriarchal, and of course, comic in its exaggeration. Next, both couples in the play form their attachments based on fictions, the name Earnest or the diary romance. Their love, though genuine, originates from performative ideas. Wilde suggests that this may be how all love begins, in an idealized image of the person, rather than in who they truly are. When we look at marriage in the play, Wilde presents it as a kind of performance. Gwendolen and Cecily set the terms for their engagements. They demand a specific name, qualities, and promises. The men then scramble to meet these conditions. Wilde humorously reverses the typical Victorian pattern, where men pursue women and women are passive. Here, women are active agents. Finally, Wilde inverts the Victorian marital hierarchy. In this play, it's actually the women who propose conditions and the men who comply. This shift highlights themes of female power and agency within marriage, tying into the overall exploration of gender roles and societal expectations. Whenever people agree with me, I always feel I must be wrong. This quote from Wilde highlights how he systematically inverts Victorian moral certainties. It shows that being serious can appear ridiculous, while triviality can be surprisingly wise. Essentially, the play is a sustained attack on earnestness as a moral virtue. The obsession with cucumber sandwiches, muffins, and cake during moments of crisis is more than just comic relief. Food here symbolizes aesthetic pleasure, pleasure pursued regardless of circumstances. Wilde's aesthetic doctrine treats pleasure as an end in itself, and this is made both edible and absurd through these food symbols. Algernon's epigrams aren't just decorative, they serve as the core argument of the play. The sparkling surface wit isn't just style for style's sake, it embodies the moral message. To see style as separate from serious content is a mistake. Wilde's style is actually his sincerity, his true moral stance. Wilde's aesthetic movement believed that art doesn't simply reflect life. Rather, life aspires to be art. Cecily's diary, where she writes her romantic story before experiencing it, exemplifies this idea perfectly. The play itself is a piece of trivial art that, paradoxically, holds more truth than Victorian earnestness. Finally, the subtitle, a trivial comedy for serious people, captures Wilde's core aesthetic idea that what seems trivial can be the highest form of art. It's a bold statement about the power of style and surface, and how they can contain profound truth. This ties back to our overall theme, that art, especially aestheticism, triumphs through its style, shaping our understanding of truth and morality. Let's take a closer look at slide 16. Here, we see how Wilde uses a balanced syntactic form, something that normally delivers a straightforward moral judgment, but he twists it to reveal a shocking callousness. For example, the line, "to lose one parent may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness," is structured like a serious moral statement, but its content is surprisingly cold and dismissive. This approach illustrates the concept of antithesis, treating trivial matters with the gravity of serious issues. Wilde often does this to subvert traditional moral hierarchies. Think about how he discusses cucumber sandwiches with the same urgency as a diplomatic crisis. It's humorous because it elevates something trivial to a matter of life and death, exposing the absurdity of Victorian priorities. Next, we encounter bathos, which involves descending into the ridiculous to highlight moral pretensions. Miss Prism's definition of fiction, "the good ended happily and the bad unhappily," exposes Victorian moral fiction as wishful thinking. It's overly simplistic and idealized. Then there's the non sequitur, like Lady Bracknell's famous "a handbag," treating a social irregularity as if it were a criminal offense. Here, literalism becomes a weapon of class distinction, turning everyday objects into symbols of moral or social judgment. Comic literalism takes a familiar moral platitude and turns it upside down to reveal hypocrisy. Wilde's line, "I can resist everything except temptation," is a perfect example. What sounds like a moral declaration actually exposes human weakness and self-deception. Epiphanic inversion is another technique Wilde uses, flipping the Victorian certainty that truth is plain and accessible. When he states, "the truth is rarely pure and never simple," he invites us to question our own moral confidence and see that truth is complex and nuanced. Finally, the paradox. Wilde's language isn't just decorative. It embodies the very satire and drama of his work. His epigrams do more than describe, they enact the critique, making language a tool for moral and social commentary. All of these devices, antithesis, bathos, non sequitur, comic literalism, epiphanic inversion, and paradox, serve to show that Wilde's wit isn't just clever wordplay. It's a powerful way to challenge and critique Victorian morality, making the language itself part of the moral argument. Throughout the play, we see that physical hunger is portrayed as more genuine than social hunger, which includes desires for status, marriage, or approval. Algernon's love of eating stands out as his most consistently honest trait. Food here becomes a space where Wildean characters cannot pretend. It reveals true feelings. When we look at appetite as a form of authenticity, it's clear that Wilde uses food to highlight the difference between superficial social rituals and genuine emotion. For example, in Act II, Cecily and Gwendolen turn hospitality into a kind of weapon. When one guest declines sugar, offering it anyway becomes an act of subtle aggression. Wilde cleverly uses these food rituals to dramatize the gap between social form and real feeling. That's the core tension running through the play. Moving on, during the engagement crisis in Act II, Algernon eats muffins, saying, "One must eat something." Even as emotional chaos unfolds, food remains a constant. It continues regardless of the drama around it, showing us that physical appetite is more honest and persistent than social performances. It's a reminder that genuine desire endures beyond superficial appearances. And then, there's the scene where Algernon devours all the sandwiches meant for Lady Bracknell. This act of eating for pleasure, without consequences, embodies the aesthetic ideal Wilde champions, art and beauty for their own sake. Appetite here symbolizes all the suppressed desires of Victorian society, desires that social propriety tries to hide. Finally, the image of cucumber sandwiches, a quintessential symbol of Victorian civility, connects all these ideas. Wilde uses these food moments, muffins, cake, sandwiches, to explore the themes of food, appetite, and desire. They're not just about sustenance, they reveal what characters truly want beneath the veneer of social politeness. Now, let's look at the clever plan both men have to have themselves rechristened as Earnest. Wilde's joke here is that they want to use the church's most sacred language, its sacramental language, to actually resolve a rather trivial, comic misunderstanding about a name. It's a brilliant example of how sacred language is being used for something completely mundane, which adds a layer of irony and humor. Moving on to Jack's surname, Worthing, it's not just a random choice. It evokes the idea of being worthy, which ironically contrasts with the double life he leads. Plus, Worthing is a seaside town in Sussex, where Wilde wrote the play. So it grounds the story in real Victorian geography, but it also keeps the tone light and comic. And then there's the invented friend's name, Bunbury. At first glance, it seems arbitrary, but it's actually become a slang term for making up excuses to avoid obligations. Wilde chose a name that sounds like a place where a sickly gentleman might retreat, perfect for his comic purposes. It's a brilliant piece of coinage that adds to the humor. Now the core pun of the play revolves around the name Earnest. On one level, it's a simple name. On another, Earnest is a moral quality, meaning sincere or serious. Wilde plays with this duality, showing that names don't necessarily describe reality, they actually help create it. And in the end, Wilde hilariously reunites these ideas, restoring the pun's full absurdity in the final reveal. So ultimately, in the importance of being earnest, names aren't just labels. They shape our perceptions and realities, highlighting how language has the power to construct social identities and truths. Now, let's delve into the garden scenes of Act II. These scenes are quite theatrical in nature. Entrances and exits are carefully choreographed, and revelations are timed to create maximum impact. It's interesting because, on the surface, the natural setting appears to be a symbol of innocence, but Wilde actually uses it ironically. The garden becomes a space where some of the most artificially constructed confrontations take place. This leads us to the idea of the garden as a stage. Wilde suggests that the country, which should be innocent and pure, is actually where London's fictions have taken root. For example, Cecily's diary is portrayed as sophisticated as any London drawing room. So, the pastoral, which we often think of as natural and untouched, is actually deeply ironic here. It contains no real escape from artifice. Moving to Hertfordshire in Acts II and III, we see Algernon's flat, which is a symbol of surface pleasure. It's decorated with a piano, silverware, cucumber sandwiches, all elements that represent aesthetic pleasure and refinement. This space embodies the aesthetic doctrine that beauty and refinement are ends in themselves, not means to some higher moral purpose. Next, we have the city of social performance, Algernon's flat again. It's a space of wit, epigrams, and social competition. Lady Bracknell's society operates within this environment. London becomes a kind of stage where identity is carefully managed, a carefully produced performance rather than authentic self-expression. Finally, looking at London in Act I, Wilde uses these two settings, the country and the city, not just as physical locations, but as moral territories. They serve to structure his satirical argument, contrasting innocence with artificiality, nature with artifice, and simplicity with social performance. Overall, the imagery of city versus country functions as a space-based moral map, helping Wilde critique the superficiality of society and the false notions of innocence and authenticity. On this slide, we see how Wilde cleverly uses physical objects as symbols throughout the play. Both women receive rings during their engagements, symbolizing romantic commitment. But interestingly, they both remove these rings during their quarrel in Act II, turning what should be symbols of love into disposable social tokens. Wilde's joke here is a sharp commentary on how society commodifies love's symbols, reducing them to mere objects. Moving on, we have the ring that the woman lost along with her baby. This loss highlights her confusion between text and child, as she mistakenly places each in the wrong container. It's arguably the play's most Freudian joke, showing how the writer values her fiction more than her own child. Wilde uses this to satirize the idea of art consuming life, treating aesthetic ideals as literal and absurd. Next, Miss Prism's manuscript is a key prop. It's a bureaucratic army list that reveals Jack's true name, Earnest John. This document is intentionally dry and mundane, yet it resolves the romantic confusion in the play and delivers the final pun. Wilde mocks official record-keeping, suggesting that bureaucracy can be the ultimate maker of identity. Then we have the inscribed cigarette case, a small but significant object. It's marked from little Cecily, exposing Jack's double life. This elegant silver case conceals a buried truth, showing how beauty and surface can hide deeper, more complicated realities. Wilde uses this to symbolize how appearances often deceive. Following that, Cecily's diary acts as a prophetic document. It records a romance that hasn't even happened yet, illustrating how art anticipates life. Wilde sees the diary as a symbol of creative imagination's power, how art can shape experience, and also parodies the Victorian diary as a confessional tool, exaggerating its significance. Finally, we encounter the black handbag, which is the play's originating mystery. It's a symbol of arbitrary origin, highlighting how identity is both lost and eventually found through accident. This handbag also functions as a feminist joke, since a woman's accessory generates and resolves the entire male plot, adding a layer of social commentary. Overall, Wilde uses these objects, handbag, diary, cigarette case, army list, as comic symbols. They represent themes of identity, memory, and social truth, woven into the play's satire and wit. Let's explore some of Wilde's key literary and dramatic devices. First, we have the use of comic triviality to deflate serious or emotional moments. For example, the image of muffin eating during a marital crisis or Lady Bracknell's horror at a simple handbag. Wilde often uses this technique to lighten the mood or highlight the absurdity of social conventions. Next, there's bathos and anticlimax, where Wilde defies our expectations by resolving complex plot threads with mathematical precision, much like the French dramatic structure, careful exposition, rising action, and logical resolution. But Wilde uses this convention ironically, making the resolution both perfect and morally absurd, emphasizing the play's satirical edge. Moving on to the well-made play, we see Wilde's mastery of dramatic irony. For instance, we know Algernon isn't earnest when he courts Cecily, but she remains unaware. The audience is always a step ahead, especially regarding Jack and Algernon's double identities, which adds layers of humor and tension. Dramatic irony is a central tool here. Wilde's witty epigrams, like the famous line about losing parents, invert common sense and create memorable, paradoxical statements. These short, sharp remarks are his primary dramatic weapon, revealing truths with wit. Then there's the comedy of manners, exemplified by Lady Bracknell's questionnaire or the humorous tea-table exchanges between Cecily and Gwendolen. Wilde satirizes societal manners and values through wit rather than slapstick or physical comedy, making us reflect on the absurdities of polite society. Finally, we have farce, which is evident in the impeccably timed arrival of Algernon as Earnest, just as Jack announces Ernest's death. The play's plot is full of improbable, escalating events, two Ernests, two fiancés, one handbag, all woven into a classic farce structure, creating comedic chaos. So, in summary, Wilde's use of these devices, comic triviality, bathos, irony, satire, and farce, serves to both entertain and critique society, making his work timeless and richly layered. On this slide, we see how Jack's character arc evolves through the 3 acts, highlighting his journey from detachment to genuine commitment. Initially, in Act I, Jack is all about maintaining his composed, detached persona, hiding his true self behind a facade. He's a master of epigrams, using wit and irony to navigate society, but there's little sincerity behind his words. Moving into Act II, Jack adopts the persona of Bunbury as a form of escape, a way to avoid the responsibilities and expectations placed upon him. His system is purely philosophical, favoring freedom and avoidance, yet he casually exposes Algernon's deception without moral judgment. This reveals his cynical wit, but also hints at his underlying desire for authenticity. By Act III, we see the most significant transformation. Jack unexpectedly falls for Cecily, and with heartfelt sincerity. Love begins to break down his ironist exterior, leading to a quiet redemption. His identity, once a constructed fiction, is finally resolved when he discovers he is truly Earnest. This revelation restores his sense of self, turning his earlier duplicity into a cosmic joke, an ironic but fitting ending. Throughout this journey, Algernon also faces disruptions. He discovers Jack performing his own fiction, dressed in mourning for a brother still alive, exposing how their carefully built personas collapse under the weight of truth. Algernon's double life, performing Earnest in London and acting as responsible guardian in the country, serves as a survival strategy, reflecting the societal pressures to maintain incompatible roles. In summary, both characters' arcs reveal their struggles with identity, societal expectations, and sincerity. Jack's evolution from detachment and superficial wit to real love and self-awareness embodies the play's theme of personal redemption and the transformative power of love. In this slide, we see a comic inversion that highlights Wilde's playful challenge to Victorian values. Jack, in Act III, finally declares that the trivial, specifically a name, is the only thing that truly matters. Wilde suggests that what we consider trivial may actually carry more genuine feeling than what we deem serious. It's a clever reversal that questions the importance placed on seriousness versus triviality. Moving to Miss Prism in Act II, her definition exposes Victorian moral fiction, the idea that narratives should always deliver poetic justice. Wilde's play refuses this expectation. It ends happily without clearly distinguishing between good and bad characters. This is a direct challenge to the moral certainties of the time. Gwendolyn's obsession with her diary, which she treats as entertainment, shows that self-documentation has become a form of performance rather than genuine reflection. This deliberate public display of the private is a satirical comment on Victorian confessional culture, exposing its pretensions and superficiality. Lady Bracknell's line, "I never travel without my diary," is famous because it uses a moral maxim to deliver a judgment of breathtaking inhumanity. It's a sharp satire, highlighting how superficial and sensationalist Victorian society can be, even in seemingly innocent habits. Then we have Algernon's remark about losing both parents, which opens the play's satirical assault on Victorian moral certainty. It immediately sets up the idea that received wisdom can be inverted or turned on its head, emphasizing the play's playful critique of social norms. Finally, Wilde's famous line, "The truth is rarely pure and never simple," encapsulates the play's core message, that moral and social truths are often complex, not clear-cut. It reminds us that beneath the surface, life and morality are more complicated than the rigid certainties Victorian society often claimed to hold. Overall, these quotes and ideas underscore Wilde's wit and his challenge to Victorian moral pretensions, emphasizing that what society often considers trivial, simple, or superficial can carry deeper truth and feeling. Lady Bracknell truly stands out as the greatest comic villain in theater, a character whose sharp wit and commanding presence have captivated audiences for generations. Wilde's wit, meanwhile, has never been surpassed in English comedy, making his work timeless and endlessly quotable. The play's satire of class remains painfully accurate even today, highlighting the absurdities and pretensions of Victorian society. Its core message, that surfaces can sometimes be more honest than what lies beneath, feels especially modern and relevant in our current world. Why does it still matter? Well, it's been adapted into musical and opera versions, and there are countless parodies that keep the play alive in popular culture. Every decade, we see new revivals on West End and Broadway stages, proving its enduring appeal. Notably, the 2002 film featuring Colin Firth and Rupert Everett, and the 1952 version with Michael Redgrave and Edith Evans, which is often considered the definitive adaptation, have brought Wilde's comedy to new audiences. In recent years, feminist critics have reinterpreted Gwendolen and Cecily as proto-feminist heroines, reclaiming their independence and wit. Today, Wilde's play is ranked among the greatest comedies in English literature. After Wilde's death in 1900, the play was recovered and celebrated, and it's clear that its influence persists. However, it's important to remember that the play's themes of double lives and societal hypocrisy had a painful resonance during Wilde's own time. The play's success was cut short when Wilde was imprisoned from 1895 to 1897, just 6 weeks after its premiere in February 1895, which was the peak of his career. Wilde's arrest for gross indecency reflected the intense societal and legal pressures he faced, which ultimately overshadowed his artistic achievements. Connecting all these points, Wilde's context, his personal struggles, societal critique, and the play's ongoing adaptations remind us why his work remains vital. It's not just about comedy, it's about challenging societal norms and exploring complex human truths that still resonate today. We start with a famous quote from Wilde's Lady Windermere's fan. "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." This line really captures the essence of Wilde's outlook, acknowledging our flaws but also our aspirations. This play was first performed on February 14, 1895, and remarkably, it's still running in the West End today, which speaks volumes about its enduring appeal. It's considered the greatest English comedy since Shakespeare, and that's a pretty significant claim, highlighting its lasting impact on theatrical history and comedy. Moving on to the legacy section, Wilde's work is a mix of epigram and farce, short, witty statements and humorous exaggerations that make the play both clever and entertaining. It's filled with paradoxes and irony, which are key to understanding Wilde's humor, showing the contradictions in society and human nature. The play is a well-made play, meaning it's crafted with meticulous structure, engaging plot, and sharp dialogue, something that keeps audiences hooked. Now, looking at craft, Wilde explores themes like food and appetite, which can symbolize desire and excess. Names and documents are also important, often used to reveal character and social identity. The contrast between city and country settings highlights differences in lifestyles, values, and social classes. In terms of imagery, Wilde uses earnestness and identity, questions of authenticity versus performance, along with themes of class and marriage, which are central to the comedy. He also plays with aesthetics and language, emphasizing beauty, style, and wit, making language itself a tool for comedy and critique. Themes in the play include Wilde's trademark paradoxes, the trivial versus the serious, sincerity versus falsehood, and truth versus deception. Wilde's masterpiece endures because its core joke, that what seems trivial can be serious, and vice versa, is endlessly relatable and thought-provoking. It's both the lightest comedy and the most penetrating, offering humor that makes us think deeply about society, identity, and human folly. In conclusion, the importance of being earnest remains a timeless work because it combines clever wit, sharp social critique, and a playful yet profound exploration of life's contradictions.